Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Excuse my stage lighting. Today's talk is going to be about who we are and who we are not. So who we are is formless consciousness. Formless means it has no thing in which it consists of. It's like an invisible set of eyeballs and it can't see itself. In order for something that you are that is formless, that can't see itself, to be realized, it needs illusion. In order for enlightenment, there must be an illusion. And what that means is it needs the enlightenment that you are to identify in something that you are not, which is an idea, which is ego, which is the essential fabric foundation to what ego is. It's a bunch of ideas that you hold in your mind's eye. And the reason why these ideas are present and in your experience is because they are a perfect mirror reflection of the consciousness that you are, that has not yet been realized yet. So everything that your ego is generating in the field of experience, and it also needs to be noted that you are the field of experience that, if it did not exist, no experience could happen. So you are the playing field, you are the stage, you are life itself, you are the lights on switch in which all experiences, which are an idea, which gets played out onto the stage, is subject to identification and identityhood with. So let's get into some distinguishments and discernments about what is the ego, and I'm going to bring up some points here that are very direct. Who you are has absolutely nothing to do with emotions. All emotions are ego. All emotions are the ego's ideas of itself, in which generates an emotional response to those ideas. So ideas do not come from direct neutral reality. They are a reflection of identification with ideas, and that idea is an ego. So what is an ego? It's a substitute identity, because you do not know your own identity yet as formless consciousness. So if you did know yourself fully as formless consciousness, there would be no ego. So therefore the ego is impersonal, and it's only just a temporary experience that's experienced within us. But because it's in us, it has a tendency to continually become re-identified with over and over again, because we don't know ourselves yet as formless consciousness, as life itself, as no thingness. So we associate ourselves with things, which is ideas. These ideas are within our experience, so we associate with them and we identify with them, and we believe that we are having emotions. Consciousness has never had an emotion. It doesn't need emotions whatsoever. Emotions are the substitute of the feeling of your own consciousnness. And that feeling of your own consciousness is like, you can say, a million orgasms that are experienced continuously. And when I say experienced, they're the fabric nature of your identity, or the fabric nature of experience. It's an experience that cannot be removed, because it is the foundation or in the base plate, it is the field of who you are. So emotions cover up this 1 million orgasm feeling of constant orgasm, and it gives you the experience that that's all that life is. So the great news is that eventually, when you begin to disidentify with ideahood more and more, and emotions lessen more and more, this constant orgasm of experience arises more and more. Another thing of who we are not any addictions. We are not a smoking addiction. We are not a drinking addiction, eating addiction, whatever addiction, sex addiction. All addictions are the experience of the ego. Very interesting red face. That's the red lights. Speaking about the ego, look like the ego at the moment. So all addictions are of the ego, and they too are 100% necessary. And if there is any addiction experience within you, it is because, again, there's a consciousness that's unrealized, a segment of your consciousness that is unrealized. Some people don't have addictions. That's because that part of their consciousness has maybe in this lifetime, or some people believe even in past lifetimes, disidentified with addiction ideahood. Their awareness has arisen through the observation of this addictions, and then their true nature has been the nature of ideahood, of substitute identityhood, and as a response, because you've seen the purpose of the illusion, your enlightenment that was hidden underneath comes forth and is realized. So just as I bring up all these particular ego things, not everyone has them, and this is evidence that it's evidence that particular forms of consciousness have served their purpose of identification with particular sets of ideas. Therefore, do not have corresponding egoic heartstrings that are being pulled within them, which are only experiences within you, which is the playing field of all experiences. And that's probably why they say you can't experience yourself, because you are the playing field in which experiences are experienced. So you can't experience the stage, I guess, but you can experience the characters on the stage. Anyway, I might pause it for now until I can think of some more illusions that we commonly associate with. So another thing that we are not is struggle. So all experience of struggle. So technically you can say every single thing that is experienced is not you. You are the playing field in which all experiences happen. So consciousness is incapable of struggle. Consciousness is ever perfect. It is untouchable. It's never been offended, outraged, upset. It's incapable of that. These are all the experience created through ideas, the ideahood. And again, evidence to prove this is that our ideahood changes over the years. So certain things such as addictions, or what else? What did I mention? Whatever else I mentioned just before that. There's addiction, struggle, and whatever that first one was, which I can't remember now. Some of these things we may experience early in our stages of life, and then later in life they disappear. And this is evidence that naturally we have disidentified with the ideahood which created these experiences. And that's why maybe if you go to a 25-year reunion, some of your classmates may be shocked because they're remembering a certain ego and expecting a certain ego, and then when they meet you, I think I've mentioned this in one of my videos where I met a friend that I hadn't seen in 20 years, and in the first 5 seconds he saw me, there was a realization that an old egoic trait was not there in me anymore. And there was no words exchanged. It was just instantly picked up that it wasn't there anymore. So, and again, as mentioned in other videos, the proof that we are not idealhood. I've had conversations with many people about this topic, where people say, no, Pete, you're wrong. I am my personality. And I say to them, how can you be your personality? Because your personality changes throughout the years. Also, your personality does not, whatever the current version, 1,000,000.0 version of it, it's never continually online all day. Maybe when you wake up, it's probably 95% offline. If there's heavy identification, it might be 100% online as soon as you wake up, which causes the experience of massive struggle. But for some people, their personality fails to upload in the morning. And I had this experience once where my identityhood forgot to upload, and because I was aware of identityhood and the falseness of it, I didn't immediately engage in re-identification with it, or the typical compulsion to immediately associate back and try to remember. Instead, I just relaxed and stood still and allowed the experience of having no identityhood, almost like you might say amnesia, but in a conscious manner, not where anything's been knocked out of line. And you can probably say amnesia is probably, if the ego wasn't complaining about not being able to remember itself, then it would probably be a pretty good experience, because and as long as it hasn't replaced itself with another dramatic idea, then it might be quite similar to enlightenment, to the enlightenment that you are, amnesia. I think I've mentioned it before in a video. Also, I've only had very limited experience with people with Down syndrome and kids with Down syndrome, but it's believed in ancient cultures, Down syndrome was your last reincarnation, and based on my limited experience with a kid with Down syndrome, I could see there was very little judgmental mind, so which is egotism, and that brings, I guess, to the fourth thing: who you are not. Consciousness is incapable of judgments, ever. It is never judged. This is an experience of the ideahood. Now, this is not to be confused with things like discernment. Judgment might be looked at as kind of like discernment. And then we might also say that once we're fully enlightened, there may be certain impulses that seem like a struggle, or seem like some sort of a thing in order to get us to do certain things. But this is not what 99% of us live in, where it's just like an experience through identification, and we're so identified with the experience that identity is creating. It actually distorts our perception of reality, and we start to think that the trigger to that experience was created by something in the outside world, which is impossible. Of course, it would be nice maybe to be in certain environments. Maybe you might prefer to live the rest of your life on a nice island rather than in the prison cell. But it's even possible if there's no ego to even enjoy a prison cell, you know. But I guess if you had some sort of choice, you wouldn't choose that. you know. But I don't want to talk about the fine lines, because none of us have really experienced full enlightenment yet. Like, I had this experience of full enlightenment a couple of years ago, only lasted for 1.5 days. And then after 1.5 days, the 10,000 kilograms of identityhood returned, which is how I am now, and that's what's speaking. And also a bit of consciousness here is speaking, a bit of both is speaking. So there's a bit of personality here speaking, which is egotism, and the consciousness behind it as well, which knows the truth to these words. And so yeah, this is my direct opinion. None of us have really experienced direct enlightenment yet, or lived in a constant daily state. I never got to interact with people when I was in that 1.5 days of enlightenment. I just stayed home. For me, the whole world didn't matter anymore. There was such a peace that the whole world and it just didn't have any validity to it anymore. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just it was just seen as not important, all the factors in the world. It was almost like a big distraction. And there was such a massive level of peace that this world wasn't needed anymore. So, but if I could have lived in that state where this identityhood didn't return, if I could have gone and did a job, if I could have done and spoken in these videos, who knows what the words would have been said. But I do know that there is most of these words spoken. It still comes from that feeling of same truth underneath, the consciousness behind it. But my interaction with people, like, it felt like in that 1.5 days, I could have been slapped in the face and spat at, and there was no reaction. And I don't mean that I'm a zombie. I was fully conscious, like I am right now, but there was no ability within me anymore to be disturbed. I was disturbless, and I realised that was my essential nature. Is untouchable disturbanceless is my essential nature, and if that interacted with the world, I'm sure it would have attracted back that it was. I'm sure we've all experienced when our ego starts manifesting and cultivating certain energy, it attracts it back in other people. You know, and you know, if you're old enough to live, then I'm sure you've experienced this 1,000,000 times already. Whatever state you're in, you seem to attract that. So I think I might pause it again and see if we can come up with any more points. We've come up with, I think, about 4 of them so far. But I think that's about it. They're pretty unquestioned states that almost 99% of the people still believe in. That's who we are. We believe that we're the ones having the emotions. We believe that we're the one that's being touched. We believe that we're the ones struggling. We're the ones having the addiction. And then our ego tries to fix all of these things, and we identify them with the fixer. And this just keeps the loop going round and round and round and round and round and round again in identification. Never-ending identification. So the ego produces all these states because it creates ideas about itself, and we identify with all this ego and who it thinks it is, and we think it's us thinking this about ourselves when it's the ego thinking. So even the one making the perception about itself, which you might say the judger, that's the ego doing that to itself. The one beating itself up, that's the ego doing it to itself. The one trying to fix itself after it's beaten itself up, that's the ego again. So the ego takes on many faces. It becomes the victim of its own actions, and then it tries to be the saviour of itself. And if you identify with the victim or the saviour, you're identifying with the loop, which keeps it all going. So the one single word or 2 single words to what I've learned in 15 years of enlightenment training is don't identify, is the first one, and the second word is identify. So when I use the word don't identify, I mean that in a conscious manner, and when I use the word identify, I also mean that in a conscious manner. I've tried to bring up videos where I try to give you enlightenment hacks, where when this character shows up on stage, try to make yourself identify with it, because you know you're not it. So if your consciousness is aware enough of itself as formless consciousness, play with this character on the stage. So consciously identify. Now notice that I said that there's two ways, there's two words. To identify is the first way to enlightenment, and the second way to enlightenment is disidentify. But both have one thing in common, which is consciousness amidst those two things. And then you can probably say the two ways to unenlightenment is unconsciously identify, and is there such a thing as unconsciously disidentify? Hang on, I need to think about that one. Can we unconsciously disidentify? Yes, I guess that probably be what the psychologists would call suppression. Suppression, I guess. So it's the ego trying to disassociate from itself, but you're being the resistor ego. So therefore, yeah, so that, I think that's it really. So, so there is two ways to enlightenment, and there's two ways to unenlightenment, and that is to identify and disidentify consciously, and identify and disidentify unconsciously. So they're the four ways. And as I once did a Facebook post where I draw a picture. I didn't draw the picture. I made a pictures up in sort of like a collage. There was two pictures. One was of a very happy young woman sitting on a gold throne with a corgi, and the other picture was of a cartoon guy in a suit, and he was curled up in a cardboard box, and he was very peaceful and happy. And I wrote under it, there's two ways to enlightenment, and that is to identify, is to what was it? Yeah, it was to the two ways to enlightenment. I'll just switch this off. I hope the sound wasn't too much off. So the two ways to enlightenment. Maybe if I can get some light from this glove box, because my interior light doesn't work. Hang on. Yep. I think it's. Let's see if I can get some glove box. Get my stage lights going and get some glove box light. Hang on. There we go. So yeah, there's two ways to enlightenment. That is to, I can't remember what it was. It was to be happy on the gold throne. There's two ways to enlightenment. One is to be sitting on a gold throne, and one is to be in a cardboard box, which is done through consciousness. And the two ways to unenlightenment is to sitting on a gold throne or sleeping in a cardboard box. They're the two ways to unenlightenment. So the answers were both the same for both, but the difference was the state of consciousness amidst the two. So the unenlightenment form, sitting on the gold throne, which is the ego lost in riches and trying to fill the bottomless pit. And the unenlightenment sleeping in the cardboard box is the resisting sleeping in the cardboard box. And it is possible, you know, I've been in certain living situations that are technically not ideal, almost on the fringe of homelessness, sleeping in this van. And, you know, because I had the consciousness, it was a joy. I said to my friends, I'm camping. So, it's beautiful light. Hope you like my stage lighting, which is this, yeah, it's this glove box light. So, yeah, but I guess 10 years ago, my ego would have toffed itself sleeping in the van. It would have complained about certain things. It would have complained about, you know, pissing in the bottle, and because I didn't have no setup in here, shitting in a bag, and you know, now I have a so-called roof over my head that's classed by society as normal. I've got the radio on. One moment. But that's probably an example I've had in my life is. Oh, hang on. is that, you know, I can now go through things that are so-called where my ego would have been extremely depressed and unhappy. And I remember there was a stage when I was 21 and I got got forced out of home, and my ego went into anxiety and it hyperventilated. And so yeah, I've experienced and I did have I remember I had probably my first awakening moment was at 21 years old when that happened, when that hyperventilation happened. Because there was this peacefulness came, and then it was probably the first time I could realise the experience was actually created by my thoughts about the situation, which I considered as my thoughts back then. But that was good enough for the beginnings of my awakening. I was be able to see the relationship between thoughts and experiences, and ultimately identification with thoughts. But I never looked at it in that way. I just thought, I'm thinking this way, and that's what I've created my experience this way. And it was very self-evident, because I had an uncontrollable hyperventilation. It was probably going to cause a heart attack at a fit 21-year-old kid. And that's the effects. So mainly while I make these videos, there's a background where I come from. That I still have a big ginormous ego. But my ego has also a somewhat equal level of awareness at the moment. And I probably do feel maybe in the next few months, maybe permanent enlightenment might happen, because I'm starting to have realizations now, where I'm even starting to look at the body in the mirror and see that that's not me. I'm not that body. I'm the life force which gives life to that body. You know, I'm just having much more experiences that's undoing more and more layers of the onion of identification at a deeper level. And although intellectually I understand the concepts, because I've been studying this for 15 years, which is a good thing. Nothing wrong with being an academic of consciousness studies, or spirituality, if some people want to call it that, which is what I do consider as somewhat helpful, but it won't cause enlightenment. But it'll come on its own when it's ready, or, you know. But I'm still debating whether, and maybe I might discuss that in another video, the opportunities of actually, can you actually force enlightenment and make it? There's a movie called The Game with Michael Douglas, and in that, millions of dollars. It's a fantastic movie. It's an old movie made back in the 90s. With Sean Penn, Michael Douglas. I think I spoke about this video in a previous video. But yeah, there's a company out there trying to create the experience of enlightenment, and the multi-millionaire son buys it for his multi-billionaire father. He buys an enlightenment experience, and it's basically a life experience which seems real, which creates identification. But I hope, I'm going to make a video, because I've got so much to talk about that. About is it possible to actually forcefully create enlightenment, whether it be through 5-MeO, DMT and ayahuasca, or a pseudo experience. I won't give away too much, but that'll be in my next video. Okay, thanks everyone, and here we go. Thanks for watching, and please, I want to start to encourage people to make comments. And ultimately, any comments, or if you want to answer to a particular comment to something that I've said, of course, the answer will come within you if you just become still. So you don't need me to answer it, because everyone has infinite intelligent consciousness within them. It's your very nature, but there's nothing wrong with asking another consciousness, which is you. You're really asking you for a particular insight. But yeah, as I said, all insights can happen naturally within you. If you just be still, and it'll probably come up in about a minute or so. If you just sit still, hold the intention that you need the insight, don't expect the insight, and it'll just come to you. And you eventually get so good at it that you don't even have to wait a minute. It just happens naturally in a second. And that comes from not using the ego's expectations, or wanting or needing to know. So you almost become like mindless, or a fool, you can say. but instead you actually become super intelligent in that full state, because it doesn't want to know, doesn't need to know, doesn't have to know, and then it comes out of who you are, the answer. Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, make a comment if you want, and yeah, thank you.